IoT botnets may best be considered an instance of a more general problem with poorly secured endpoints. Good digital hygiene can be good digital citizenship. IoT device recalls follow the DDoS against Dyn. Attribution of the attacks remains up in the air. Clapper looks at multinational hackers. Jester looks at Russia, and Russia looks at Jester and sees Vice President Biden. And yes, John McAfee is looking at North Korea. Stay tuned. Time for a timely message from our sponsors at E8 Security, putting your data together with E8's analytics for security that can handle the unknown unknowns. Consider what might warn you off to malware on your system. Listening or running programs on a rare or never-seen-before open port is one of them. It's easy to say that, but could you say what counted as rare or never seen before? Or would that information jump out at you as you reviewed logs? If you had time to review your logs, and by the time the logs reached you, the news would be old. But E8's analytical tools recognize and flag the threat at once, enabling you to detect, hunt, and respond. Get the white paper at e8security.com/DHR and get started. E8 Security, your trusted partner. And we thank E8 for sponsoring our show. I'm Dave Bittner in Baltimore with your CyberWire summary for Tuesday, October 25th, 2016. Security cameras and Soho routers formed the better part of the Mirai botnet herd that stampeded through Dyn at the end of last week. One IoT vendor, Will Price, founder of Simple Control, told CE Pro that it's misleading to call this DDoS incident an Internet of Things problem. He would rather understand it as a problem with vendors releasing products that aren't properly secured, an issue that's certainly not confined to the IoT. As he put it, quote, "The budding Internet of Things has no more to do with this than the advent of the Internet caused Windows XP security problems," end quote. He's got a point, but the combination of widespread deployment, weak security, and user inattention do seem to make the IoT particularly vulnerable to this sort of exploitation. Ray Rothrock, CEO and chairman of cybersecurity analytics company Red Seal, told the CyberWire that, quote, "The reality is that the millions of systems and things connected to networks and each other create unprecedented capabilities for both good and harm," end quote. He thinks the problem is a species of the genus endpoint insecurity, and that the proper response should involve putting network security controls in place to limit the effects of such attacks. We also heard from Eldon Sprickerhoff, founder and chief security strategist of cybersecurity firm eCentire, who offered some advice to users of the kinds of devices implicated in the attacks. Because so many basic devices are now internet-enabled and connected, it's too easy for their users, and that means most of us, to overestimate their default security. No one wants their devices herded into a botnet. It's poor digital hygiene and citizenship, the virtual equivalent of spitting on the sidewalk, and it can also affect your own systems in unpleasant ways. Sprickerhoff recommends taking at least the following measures with your security system, your router, your baby monitor, with all those things at home that quietly and routinely touch the internet. First, change device passwords and use different complex passwords for each different system. Next, ensure you've upgraded to the newest firmware available. And finally, restrict external access to home devices with firewalling, disabling remote access capabilities, and things like that. One manufacturer, Hangzhou Shomai Technology, which produces components widely used in digital video recorders and network security cameras, has acknowledged that vulnerabilities in its products were exploited in the DDoS attacks on Dyn. They're recalling thousands of devices to aid remediation of the vulnerability. Attribution of the Dyn attack still remains unclear. We heard a lot of speculation Saturday at the U.S. Army and NATO-sponsored CyCon event in Washington that a nation-state was behind the attacks, and pretty much everyone was looking at you, Russia. But in truth, not only is it difficult to disentangle state-sponsored activity from organized crime, but the Mirai code has been freely available for some time. The Washington Free Beacon said that U.S. Director of National Intelligence Clapper told it the incident was the work of a multinational hacker group. He didn't elaborate, but other sources suggested to the Free Beacon and others that this was more a case of vandalism than it was a nation-state attack. One apparent patriotic hacktivist, Jester, is convinced the Russians are coming. He, she, or they sent Russia a message by defacing an old foreign ministry site, and the Russian foreign ministry was not amused, suggesting darkly that one might well perceive the hidden hand of Vice President Biden behind Jester. Last week at Cyber Maryland, we sat down with Malcolm Harkins, Chief Security and Trust Officer at Cylance, to get his opinions, strong ones it turns out, on the state of the cybersecurity industry, particularly when it comes to taking risks.
I believe that, losers quit when they're tired, winners quit when they've won. I think we've quit on the attempt to win this stuff and capitulated to, I think, a broad industry notion that compromise is inevitable versus the notion that attempt to compromise is inevitable. And I don't think you can fully eliminate the risk, but I do think many people have given up on the ability to prevention, and that's a shame.
Where do you think this attitude of surrender comes from?
Well, a couple things. One is, for years and years and years, the degradation of the effectiveness for security solutions has been occurring. And we've all experienced it. I've experienced it. And so I think there's a confirmation bias, so to speak, that because that's happened for a long time, we have to accept that that's the only solution or the only approach, in which case we default to detection and response. And I'm a former business guy and got a background in economics. And when you think about it, the security industry itself profits from the insecurity of computing. Mm-hmm. And one could argue then, logically, for profit motives, the vast majority of the industry, not all of it, but a substantial portion of it, grows because of the insecurity of computing and the problems that occur. So economically, what do we think has happened? Well, the vast majority of the industry has come out with detection and response capabilities because that's where people were anchored in, and that's where they would like you to continue to believe you have to be. And I don't think you, as I said before, you can fully eliminate risk, but I think we can do a far better job of preventing a substantial portion of the risks that we're experiencing. We should absolutely constantly pursue perfection. It's okay to win ugly. And sometimes, having been in the security industry a long time, I've won ugly a lot. And some of that is being more of a risk taker. So, again, if you're in the security role and you're in the information risk role, how often are you taking risks? Your job is to, in many ways, manage people from taking risks. And sometimes you have to take a risk on a newer technology, a newer approach, a newer thought so you kind of have to run to the risky thing in order to manage the risk.
But is risk-taking rewarded in this industry?
In some ways, unfortunately, no. And it's again, a cultural underpinning.
Yeah.
Right? But in many ways, and again, part of the dialogues that we had even in the panel I was on today on C-suite concerns, businesses are in the job of managing risk. When you launch a new product, when you build a new building, when you go and enter a new market, that's risk-taking. It's financial risk-taking. And so businesses are in the business of taking risk. And those that manage those risks the best are generally the ones who win.
That's Malcolm Harkins from Cylance. And finally, antivirus pioneer, security gadfly, and sometime, we think, presidential candidate John McAfee says he knows who done it. North Korea done it. He bases this attribution on what he describes as dark web chatter. But commenters on the web have taken a tell-it-to-the-Marines attitude toward this. John can sometimes pop off like the much-beloved but eccentric uncle at the Thanksgiving table, like the time he said he had a team of digital ninjas who could unlock an iPhone even if the FBI couldn't. Maybe yes and maybe no. But in the case of attributing the Mariah attacks, the story is still, as they say, developing. Time for a word from our sponsor, Delta Risk. You've heard, of course, that those who fail to plan to fail. Sure, that's a bit of a cliche, but it's true nonetheless. Delta Risk is here to help you plan. Companies focus on preventing cyber incidents, and they should, but they also need to realize that all prevention will, in all likelihood, at some point fail. And when that happens, you don't want to be improvising on an incident response. Delta Risk, a Chertoff Group company, has been in the business of helping enterprises improve their cybersecurity and protect their business operations since 2007. If you don't have an incident response plan, or if you're not sure you've got a good one, test yourself against the challenges Delta Risk outlines in their white paper, Top 10 Cyber Incident Pain Points. Are you prepared? You can download it at delta-risk.net/top10. That's delta-risk.net/top10. Download the white paper and check it out. And we thank Delta Risk for sponsoring the CyberWire. And I'm pleased to be joined once again by Joe Carrigan. He's from the Johns Hopkins University Information Security Institute. Joe, we've been seeing these stories about IoT botnets. I thought it might be interesting for you and I to just kind of go through sort of inventory. What are the typical IoT types of devices that people have in their homes and their offices? Because some of them are surprising. I mean, let's start with the obvious one. The cameras, that's
right.
That's the one that gets all the press.
The security cameras or the doorbell cameras that I see ads on TV for now. You think about them as providing a video stream out to the world. If you haven't taken the time to go through and change the default password, then it's probably open to everybody to see. And as we've seen with the recent botnet that took down Krebs site, to even exploit and make your camera part of a botnet.
Yeah, and I think a point to make with the Krebs botnet attack was that was all done with default passwords.
Default passwords. That's right.
Every device on that botnet, according to the people we've spoken to, was all default passwords. So job one, when you get any IoT device, or any device really in general that connects to your network or the internet, change the password. But there were other devices involved with that I hadn't really thought of. And the main one for me was DVRs.
Right. Yeah, you and I were talking before the show, and I was thinking about smugly saying, well, I don't have very many or any Internet of Things devices in my house, but I do have a DVR. Not only do I have a DVR, but I have another cable box in my house that I think also runs a Linux operating system that can access the DVR. They're networked together. They're inside my house. They have obvious ways to get outside to get the content that gets downloaded. Those are Internet of Things devices.
Yeah, and again with this Krebs thing, the code that they would put in the DVR lived in the DVR's RAM. So if you rebooted the DVR, it would get wiped out. But how often do you reboot your DVR? Yeah. I don't know that. I mean, when the power goes out in the house, that's when my DVR gets rebooted.
Right, exactly. I think the only way I know how to reboot my DVR is by yanking the power cord out of the back of it and letting it sit there for a minute and then plugging it back in. Just like when you have a technical support call, that's the first thing they tell you to do with all the hardware in your house, right?
Right. Other devices, though, I mean, we're starting to see sort of ones that make me scratch my head. I see Samsung has an internet-enabled stove.
Right. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong with a unmonitored high-temperature device connected to the internet?
I was at the. That's an excellent question. I was at the Financial Crypto Conference in February, and one of the keynote speakers was Adi Shamir, who's the S in RSA. Mm-hmm. And one of his statements was that this Internet of Things phenomenon is really going to present the hugest security problem that we've seen in a long time. He said it's just going to blow up in our faces, I think. So, I mean, how many devices were involved in that Krebs on security botnet? There was
bordering on millions
of devices. And these devices are all cheap, readily available, and they come with essentially commodity operating systems running on hardware that is significantly more powerful than was available 20 years ago.
Even if your device was taking part in this botnet, you might not notice.
Right.
The functionality of the device may not be interrupted at all.
Right, yeah. The device keeps running, so you may not ever even notice that you've got a problem.
All right, Joe. So get a new device, change that password.
That's right.
All right, good talking to you.
My pleasure.
And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, along with interviews, our glossary, and more, visit thecyberwire.com. Thanks to all of our sponsors who make the CyberWire possible. And if you're interested in reaching a global audience of security influencers and decision makers, well, you've come to the right shop. Visit thecyberwire.com/sponsors to learn more. The CyberWire podcast is produced by Pratt Street Media. Our editor is John Petrick. Our social media editor is Jennifer Iben, and our technical editor is Chris Russell. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpe, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening.